Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is a wonderful guest who's going to be talking about the power of peers. That's right, peers in an organization from small to mid-size who can come together to give fresh perspectives, especially to CEOs and management who may feel a bit isolated when it comes to getting the job done. They help solve problems, focus on opportunities and possibilities, as well as decisions that can accelerate the growth of the business that they are operating. There are 4 distinct ways to engage with peers, which is connecting, networking, optimization, and accelerating, which can show the value of each type and where they are needed. And on the program today, our guest is President of Peer Advantage for Vestige Worldwide, where he directs a thought leadership initiative on the power of peer influence for business leaders. He also serves as an adjunct professor for 2 of Seton Hall University's graduate leadership communication programs, and in April of last year, he was named Adjunct Teacher of the Year for Seton Hall's College of Communication and the Arts. He joins us today to talk about the newest book, The Power of Peers. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Leo Bottery. Leo, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me. And you offered a very nice description of what we're going to talk about today, so I appreciate that.
Well, you have to have nice descriptions because this day and age, people just don't seem to understand that it really does take a team to have success.
Well, that's true. I mean, who we surround ourselves with really matters. And what we find is that business leaders, CEOs, actually, people at any level, can help one another in ways that they just aren't going to find in a book or by taking a course or, many other means that are available. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. This is more of an and than an or. I think the idea of accessing your peers and doing so in a manner that is selective, strategic, and structured can be very, very powerful.
Now, let's first of all define what it means when we talk about a peer group here. Who are these people?
Well, they're basic, for many people, they seek out peers who can help them achieve what they want in life, whether it's in business or personal, whatever happens to be. Oftentimes I offer the example of, Daniel, if you were interested in running a marathon, you would want to surround yourself with people who are also interested in do that, who don't think it's crazy to run 26 miles, who would encourage you, who may offer you training tips along the way, and where you can hold one another accountable. And that way you can help one another be successful. I think oftentimes we are very good about identifying our goals and not always so great about enlisting the people that can help us achieve them. So whether you are trying to run a marathon or trying to grow your company or whatever your personal goal may be, you want to surround yourself with people who are like-minded, who have that same talent and dedication and commitment to success as you do, and you can lift each other up, if and when you do that.
Now, in bringing a peer group together, what are some ways that you can be sure that you're attracting the right kind of people that work? I mean, even though, you take a look at, for instance, I sometimes love using sports analogies, and I go back years ago on the days of Charles Barkley when he went to the Phoenix Suns, and here they basically put together a bunch of A-list superstars hoping they could buy a championship, and they never even came close. So, even though you may have superstars out there, it's about putting the right kinds of people together, isn't it?
Well, what's interesting is you offer a basketball example. We offer one in the book also, but it's actually from women's basketball, the University of Connecticut, and it's Gina Wariyama, who not only brings talented basketball players who are competitive, but one of the biggest criteria that's most important to being part of that Connecticut, tradition is, they're out to win championships. They are good teammates. They are not about individual stats. They are about holding one another accountable, which is what they really do. That's why that team is so good. Now, granted, Oriema is one of the best coaches in the game. They can recruit amazing players, but so does Stanford, so does Notre Dame, and so does South Carolina. But the peer-to-peer culture at Connecticut is really quite remarkable in terms of how the players really hold each other to a standard of going to practice every day and working hard, every possession in a game. And it's really all about making sure that they help one another realize their dream of winning a national championship. And that formula for them, let's face it, since 1995, they've won 11 national championships, the last 4 in a row. And the past 2 seasons in a row, they're winning games by a margin of nearly 40 points a game. And it's kind of remarkable when you consider, it's one of the big answers to that question about why are they so much better consistently than everyone else in the country. And you're exactly right. You've got to have good teammates. You've got to have people committed to one another and be selfless in that way.
Now, one of the things you talk about in the book is that there is a difference between what's known as peer advantage and peer influence. Why don't you kind of give our listeners a good idea what that means?
Sure. Our peers have been influencing us for as long as we can remember. We think about in school how important it was. Not only, we are trying to finding our way as individuals, but we also seek out this sense of belonging. And we had certainly peers in our lives who we may have modeled, for the good, and others who may have led us astray from time to time, but all the way, our peers have made a difference, and they continue to make a difference. I think as we get older, oftentimes, I think we just need to be more considered about how we access the value that we can, gain from our peers. And in that respect, we talk about the difference between the peer influence that we experience, each and every day without giving it a second thought. We kind of suggest, imagine if you gave it a second thought. What would happen if you were actually more selective, based on your goals and what you want in your life, more strategic and more structured about that engagement? How might you supercharge that peer influence that we all know so well? And that is where we believe it transcends into peer advantage, and something that is really rather remarkable when it comes to helping people just be that much better at achieving what they want.
Now let's talk about some of the reasons, let's say a CEO is listening today, and chances are pretty good that they are, why they might consider joining a peer group, and how would they go about finding one?
Sure. Well, Stanford Graduate School of Business did a study, 2013. It says nearly two-thirds of CEOs are not receiving any real outside leadership advice. And I think, for one thing, if you're a CEO out there and you're one of them, that doesn't have to be the case, right? I think there are CEOs that you can seek out who can be very helpful to you in growing your business and basically giving you a perspective that is very difficult for you to have. And I say that on two fronts. One in particular being that when you are inside your company and inside your industry, it's very difficult to get that broader perspective of what's going on in the world and the difference it can make to your organization. And secondly, while there's a lot of books out there about leadership, there's often no real guidebook about what the CEO is actually supposed to do day to day. Oftentimes, especially when small business owners, mid-sized company owners, they play this role of chief everything officer as opposed to chief executive officer. So oftentimes when you can surround yourself with other people who are sitting in that chair, faced with that challenge, who know, kind of what it's all about, they can help guide you into making sure that you're doing the things that you need to be doing as CEO. That's thinking about your company strategically. It's looking out into the future. It's making sure that you are watching for all of those opportunities that may be available, to you in the months ahead or in years ahead, or watching out for that competitor that you may not see coming unless you're really looking for it. So peers can help one another focus on the right things. We interview a gentleman in the book who's led peer advisory groups for 40, 50 years now, who basically says it's really about CEOs doing the right things and being a CEO in that role as chief executive officer. And this is where peers can help ground other CEOs and help them be much more effective at their job.
I remember some years ago I had the opportunity to talk with, and geez, the name kind of eludes me. I always have another name that jumps in. Okay, Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager.
Sure.
And what was interesting is we got into talking about management, leaderships, and CEOs, and you always wonder sometimes, and it's more often than not, they tend to feel they have to have all the answers, they have to make all the decisions, and they have to be the one driving the force. Nobody in, let's say, what can be perceived to be a lesser role is really allowed to do that. And I wondered, why is it that management and leaders feel this need in business to absolutely be right about everything?
Well, I think they want to at least to appear to be right about everything, right? You don't want to be the leader who is communicating to their people that they're afraid or they're uncertain. And so you want to make sure that you, I think, as when you're in front of your employees, that you have command of what's going on, that you are one who listens but has command of what's going on. In a peer group where there's not that expectation of you, you can actually sit among other peers and you can talk about the fact that, hey, I'm really uneasy about this. I'm really actually afraid of what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. It's not exactly something that would inspire confidence in your employees or in several of your stakeholders. So you need someone to have those kinds of conversations with. I think at the same time, when it comes to opportunities, how to grow your business, where to take it to a new level and in what direction it can move, oftentimes CEOs who get mired in their own company and own industry don't see the possibilities that are often available to them. So this is where I think it can be enormously helpful.
I know when I had asked that question, he said sometimes he felt that it was just a matter of, just not feeling personally confident. I can't remember what it was, the phrase that he used was, but I think it's something had to do with like self-esteem, I believe it was. And, I thought to myself, it's really interesting that sometimes that you see a manager, CEO, and if they find that they have made a decision that may not be right, and, of course, here the team's kind of looking at them like, well, what are you thinking here? And all of a sudden they just kind of put the foot down and say, well, that's just the way it is because I said so. And you think to yourself, well, what's so wrong about feeling maybe wrong or being slightly vulnerable in a situation that maybe you just don't have the right answer for? And I found as I had led teams, and I embraced, the 1-minute manager, and I applied the whole philosophy of it, and found that teams were not only highly motivated, but they also at the same time tended to be more imaginative and more creative about how to actually make processes seemingly streamlined and easier by allowing these people to think and say, I came up with a solution. I'm just kind of curious what you think. And so you take a look at that and say, why don't we go ahead and go with this for a while? And empower these people to be able to make the kinds of decisions that can be made based on the kind of work they do where they're really first hands into it. And you say, okay, well, I'm going to empower you to kind of go a little further with this, but you talk about vulnerability in Chapter 5 and why it's a necessary element for a successful peer group experience. Tell us about that.
Well, I want to go back, a little bit to what you said about. I think that the idea of admitting that you made a mistake can be very important. I think CEOs make mistakes too, and oftentimes the mistake a CEO makes can have bigger ramifications than most of the mistakes, the rest of us may make an organization, and I think that can show real strength of character to be able to do that. With regard to the issue of vulnerability, again, when you can sit among peers and kind of check your ego at the door and actually be in an environment where you can be real. I mean, let's face it, I think for all of us, we have very few places in life where we're not always putting our best face forward and our best foot forward. And people ask you, how's it going? And the typical answer, it's great. Everything's great. And we talk about all the wonderful things going on in our lives. And yet every one of us has stuff going on in the background, which often can have real implications, for our performance at work. And when it comes to a CEO, there can not only be business issues, but personal issues that may come into play. And it's helpful to talk with other CEOs who are experiencing all of those same things, because everyone is, and they can talk frankly about it and help one another work through that. And having that safe environment where people can feel open and really open to learn and free from being judged, and also understand, too, that in the context of that meeting, confidentiality is sacrosanct. What is said in the room stays in that room. And having that safe environment, I think, is really essential to certainly one of the pieces of the puzzle here as we talk about the 5 factors that makes these peer groups work so well.
Now, you also talk about what is known as servant leadership. Tell us about that.
Yeah, kind of what you talked about, it's my way or the highway kind of thing. Well, that would be the opposite of servant leadership, right? I mean,
well, obviously.
The servant leader it doesn't go with the mindset of, I've got all these people working for me and I'm going to make sure they can help me be successful. The servant leader is there to say, what resources, what can I do to help make you successful, in your work, in your career, in your life. And so the servant leadership mentality really flips the command and control model on its head. And the servant leadership certainly prevails in terms of smart guides who lead CEO peer advisory groups. And I think as CEOs see that behavior in the group environment, there's a tendency to model that in their own companies, and I think it makes an extraordinary difference in the way they lead.
Now, you also have to have a passion for the work as well, don't you?
You sure do. You really have to be about wanting to help others, wanting to make a difference in others' lives. And that's just not for the leader. I think that's for members as well. You have to be there really realizing and believing that the more I give to this process, not only will I help others, but the real reward, too, is that the more you will receive back. I mean, if I'm in a group of, a dozen people, and I'm giving 100%, and they're all giving 100% back to me, the ROI there is obvious. And I think time and time again, when you interview members of peer advisory groups who were uncertain about, is this going to take too much time, or how can I actually fit this in? Once they get into it and see the value, which they do very quickly, doesn't take long. The average tenure can be, depending on the organization, depending on the group, can anywhere from 5 to 8 or 9 years that a CEO or a key executive will stay with their group. And they don't do so because it's just nice to meet with these people all the time. They do so because it delivers real value to them.
Now, I remember when I was reading the chapter where you talk about utilizing a smart guide, and, a lot of times a CEO or a leader might find that they need to be at the head of the table or the center of attention. And I don't know why, but for some reason I was remembering that documentary called The Smartest Guys in the Room, the story of the fall of Enron.
I thought, yeah.
And what astounded me is what Jeff Skilling and Ken Lay came up with as a process for keeping, let's say, their staff trim, lean, and mean, I guess. And that is that the peers decided whether or not a person should stay or go. So basically, you could be on a team that votes this person off of the team and out of Enron, but realize you could be the same person 3 months from now that are sitting in front of the peer group where they make that same decision. Apparently the idea is they believe they were eliminating the weakest link, and I believe the leaders of that company were the weakest link. But anyway, talk about what utilizing a smart guide really defines.
I think it's really getting the most out of the group. I think that's really where it is. When you think about, the fact is the smart guide is really the steward of the other four factors that we talk about. They're making sure that the right people are in the room. They're making certain that environment is safe and judgment-free and having people deal with one another respectfully. They're making sure that there's an actual process for getting to the heart of an issue, whether it's meeting a challenge or identifying a certain aspiration. It's one thing to give someone emotional safety. It's quite another to intellectually make them know that the time they are spending in that meeting is going to get them somewhere in a manner they can act upon. And then also creating that culture of accountability is just essential. And as I described with University of Connecticut's basketball team, it's not that those players are always just solely accountable to the head coach and the coaching staff, but more importantly, they're accountable to one another, and that's what drives their level of excellence. So if a smart guide with a guiding hand can serve as the steward of those four factors effectively, it is a sight to see.
Now, I'm curious, as you implement what you talk about here in your book, The Power of Peers, how you've seen companies change, if in fact you have, and what that looked like.
Sure. There are countless stories of companies of all shapes and sizes, by the way, where, first of all, when you have a CEO or a leader who's really committed to making personal change, which is really what you're doing when you're joining a peer group, you are starting with you. So rather than be the leader who goes into work every day thinking they're going to fix everyone else, they work on themselves, and I think can be quite effective at that. And I think that's a real fundamental principle to why it can be so effective in the difference it can make in companies. I mean, we tell a story in the book from Jay Steinfeld, for example, who had Blinds.com. It was started out as a real mom-and-pop operation. He had tremendous personal challenges in addition to figuring out how to go from chief everything officer to chief executive officer, and took this company to basically, it was worth about $150 million by the time Home Depot bought it just about a year and a half ago, I believe it was. And, so that's a big change. And Jay, to this day, credits his group for helping him do that, and is still a member of his group today because he continues to get, tremendous value both personally and professionally for it. And there are countless stories, both in the book and outside the book, and not just from Vistage, but you look at YPO, EO, the Alternative Board, number of other organizations here in the U.S. and around the world. And when you put people together and they're committed to one another's success, they can do some very special things.
Now, because we just celebrated Memorial Day, I'd like for you to talk about the Blue Angels, because I found that was pretty interesting, because when you think about a book like this, you don't think of the United States Armed Forces, but this was pretty unique as you described their story here.
Well, we tried to really seek out examples, as you know, not just from business, but from, really various walks of life. And looking at the Blue Angels is really remarkable. And all you have to do is, if you've ever seen them, when you've got planes flying nearly 500 miles an hour at 18 inches apart, and they do it with the level of precision and consistency that they do, that's something to look at in terms of how we might be able to bring whatever it is they're doing into our own organizations. And what's remarkable about what they do is they have debriefs at the end of every one of their flights. And those debriefs involve everything from evaluating the salute to the march out to the aircraft, to everything that happens in the air, to their march all the way back. And everything has a level of precision to it that they regard obviously as essential, because the consequences could be catastrophic if there are mistakes. So these debriefs are very much about honest, open conversation. Rank is totally out the window, and they, I think, deal with one another with a level of openness and frankness, understanding that none of this is personal. This is fighting for one another, not with one another. They are fighting for that perfect flight. And even though they know that in their minds there's no such thing as a perfect flight, they chase, perfection in the pursuit of excellence. And what we get to see, I think, is a real display of that, and really quite extraordinary. And we could learn a lot from what they do. Many companies don't take the time, they don't believe it's important to debrief and really deconstruct. They get worried about people being offended and personalities and what it means and all that, when if you focus on the work and you focus on what it is you're really trying to do, that's really the name of the game. And we can learn a lot from Blue Angels and other organizations who do it so well.
It's really fascinating, because sometimes you find that the old industrial ways of thinking, especially when it comes to leadership, you need this job, so I'm going to make you as miserable as I can to be sure that you stay here. Then you wonder why you don't have somebody who's productive. And, when you had mentioned the word earlier, and I agreed with what you had written here in your book, is that the word accountability has been one of those words that people really have kind of misconstrued and kind of misperceived as something that seems to be, well, we're punishing you. It's sort of a punishment word, but that's not really what accountability means.
No, accountability is not a four-letter word, as you know. And yes, I think that it depends how it's exercised. Oftentimes, we're not really shown how to hold people accountable in a way that is, positive. I mean, what you're really trying to do is help them achieve what they said they want to do, right? So I think in many respects, so you look at a peer advisory group meeting, the difference between the outcomes of a peer advisory group meeting versus an engagement with a consultant, maybe the consultant does an analysis, they provide a report, and they talk to you about the recommendations they have for your company. You don't own those solutions in the same way you might in a peer group, where you present a challenge or an opportunity You may be given some perspectives and ways to think about that. You are then asked to report to the group what resonated with you. What do you see yourself doing in terms of action steps to move you forward? And with that process, people not only get the insights and the courage to act, but they have the ownership of the initiative in a manner that helps it be very, very successful.
It's just also fascinating when you think about what we're talking about here, and I was just thinking of The Apprentice. And now we have Donald Trump running for president. Looks like there's a possibility that he's going to get there, but whenever you watch this show, what always confuses me about it, and it's the same thing with other shows like Survivor, for instance, we're all going to play as a team, but if we lose, then one of you's got to go. And I don't see how that could be effective. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is something that most companies really need to look at. Let's face it, I mean, look at everything from the way we compensate employees, where there's all these, individual performance reviews and individual metrics and bonuses and all that, and then we say, hey, boy, you got to work at it's all about the team. Well, sometimes it's not always about the team. In fact, the evidence suggests otherwise when things aren't congruous in that way. So if you want to be an organization that really wants to foster a real team environment, you've got to be in it all the way. You can't be in it halfway. And it's one of the reasons that I think teams inside companies can run into such difficulty.
No doubt about that. It's not easy work, but it's certainly something you have to decide. Do you want to grow? Do you want to develop? And do you want to see things become successful where everybody gets to take accountability for the success of that happening here? The Power of Peers is certainly a book that can open your eyes to see about moving in a different direction and how you can go about building your own peer network. And I was going to ask you, Leo, first of all, thank you for joining us on the program, but is there a website people can discover more about this?
Sure. You can go to thepowerofpeers.com and learn more about the concept, learn more about the book, order the book if you like. We hope you do. I think it's something that, again, I think who you surround yourself with matters, and we can help each other in ways that are really extraordinary. I think we just need some guidance as to how to go about doing that. And you had asked earlier about, finding the right group. I think that we talk about the way True North groups did, whether it's starting your own group or just networking in your own community to find out what peer groups are out there, who belongs to them, what the reviews are of those, and finding what's a good fit for you and giving it a try. And I hope people do.
Now, just, in closing here, do you advise that people stick within the same kind of industry as they pull these groups together, or would it be wise to kind of maybe have a nice potpourri of people from different industries?
I think both are valuable.
Okay.
They both deliver different things. Certainly there are industry peer groups that are really effective, and I think most leaders are members or more likely to be members of industry peer groups than they are not. The downside of an industry peer group is that you end up talking to yourselves about industry practices and how things are done, as opposed to being able to step outside of your company and outside of your industry sector to see that people are handling a lot of the same challenges you have, and what is commonplace in some industries is unheard of elsewhere, and to actually expose yourself to all of those practices to see how things can work and see what's going on in that regard. I think there's some real value and real benefit to that. So I think that's kind of the difference between the two. But I think in the book, clearly, we want to open people's minds to this idea that if you're going to accelerate, you need to step outside of your company and industry to do so.
And you certainly need to be willing to grow, learn, and adapt as well, correct?
You bet.
Absolutely. Leo, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. One more time, what is that website?
It's thepowerofpeers.com.
Powerofpeers.com. Doesn't get any easier than that. Leo, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me as well. You have a great day.
You too. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in and joining us. Be sure to visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-news updates to keep up to date with what's going on in the Beyond 50 community, as well as upcoming interviews, as well as resources. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio, as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past.